hoping this video is pretty much a refresher for you. This is our third video in the Ecology unit. Ecology is a much longer unit. It's several chapters in your book. This is going to be number 5, so we've gotten to there in our notes. And it's all about energy flow and production. So how do we have energy in our ecosystem? Where does it come from? How does it get transferred from one type of organism to another type of organism? So we start off with food chains. So when you have a food chain, you have different trophic levels. And I'm hoping in your head that you are thinking about producers and consumers and what do they do in a food chain. So they are all about the feeding relationships. You start with the energy from the sun, and then that energy is used by producers or autotrophs. They are going to capture that energy from the sun through the process of photosynthesis, produce sugar, and then when they're eaten, that sugar gets passed on to the next generation. Producers are always the first level in our food chain, and a food chain, you'll remember, goes like this: plant, and then the arrow always goes in the direction in which the energy is being transferred. So the energy is going from the plant to, let's say this is deer, and the deer are eating that plant. All right. Food chains usually only go up 4 or 5 levels. You usually can't go any further than that because there's not enough energy to go further than that. There is an inefficiency of energy transfer. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. All levels all end up going back to decomposers. Again, I know that's a refresher for you. You know decomposers are the recyclers in a food web. All right, here is just an example, just a diagram. If you like putting diagrams in your notes, go ahead and add the diagram in. But I wanted you to realize we've got producers down here using the energy from the sun, and then the arrow goes to the herbivore. So an herbivore is a plant that an animal that just eats plants. That's our primary consumer, our first eater. Our secondary consumer, this could be an omnivore if it eats plants and animals, or this one here is a carnivore eating just other animals. And then our top carnivore, because usually we only have a few levels of this because of that inefficiency of energy transfer. Our top carnivore here is our tertiary consumer. These 3 are all heterotrophs. This one is an autotroph because it's able to produce its own food. Decomposers, all of these come back to the decomposers. Bacteria and fungi are 2 big groupings where the decomposers exist. And as these released wastes, or as they die, those wastes get recycled by bacteria. And then nutrients are often absorbed in the soil by producers. All right, inefficiency of energy transfer. So this is an example. Here's a bug, and out of 100% of what it ate, 17 can move on to the next level. That's actually really great. For humans, ours is about 5% energy transfer. Not that anything eats us, but that's how much of our energy we actually would have left over. 33% is energy that gets used by the cells, and the majority of energy is lost. For humans, the majority of our energy is lost as heat. We have to work constantly to keep our body temperature at 98.6, so we actually release a lot of energy in that process. All right, this is the rule, this is the pyramid, this is what I need you to have down. First of all, producers are always on the bottom. They always are the greatest in number. And instead of just counting organisms, because we don't want to count like that's one tree and then 5,000 bugs live on it, that would be a pyramid of numbers. But instead what we do is a pyramid of biomass. Biomass is how many grams are you without any water in you. So it's a dehydrated value. So producers always have to have the greatest amount. And as you go up, there is a loss. We call this the 10% rule. Only 10% of the energy gets transferred on to the next organism. So if you think about it on a really basic level, if this snake eats this mouse, there's only 10% of the energy from the mouse that ends up being used by the snake. A lot of it is waste. It's not going to use the hair, it's not going to use the bone, it's not going to use lots of its body parts. The actual transfer of energy is only 10%. Now, you could put values in there and use joules, which are like calories. They're heat energy units. And you could say, if we have this much energy here, there will only be, okay, this didn't come across so well. So if at the top level we have 1 joule, we could say this one had 10, this one would have had 100, and this one would have had 1,000. That's the 10% rule. So I don't know why these numbers, I'm guessing the boxes didn't come through well and I'd have to drag them out to be longer. But only 10% of each energy got used from the one above it. All right, humans. Us in the food chain, a lot of people talk about, hey, why are you a vegetarian? I'm not personally a vegetarian. I did go through a part of my life in college where I was a vegetarian, and it was actually based on this. It was based on energy transfer feelings. It wasn't my empathy for the animals, but instead it was my empathy for the environment and the loss of land. It takes so many acres of land to actually have cattle, and those cattle are using up so much potential energy of the plants that could be used by animals, humans. So if we are more efficient about our energy usage, where we get our calories from, I mean, we need protein, we need those kinds of things, but it's just a better use of energy. Humans as vegetarians versus humans as meat eaters. All right, next slide here, food webs. So I know you know a chain is a single linked, but a web is much more realistic picture. So here I have an example, and there's all these lines, and it looks confusing, but it's much more nutritionally accurate. You don't eat one thing, and many organisms in the environment don't eat just one thing. So this shows who could be predator and who could be prey, and what are they eating. All right, almost done here. Our last slide is about productivity. I'm guessing this will be the one that you actually didn't know before. There are two terms that you have to know. One is gross primary productivity. So the gross primary productivity, we'll refer to it as the GPP. That refers to how much energy do organisms, producers, produce. How much energy do they make? They use the sun, they do photosynthesis, and they produce sugar. So, amount of light energy converted to chemical energy by photosynthesis. So this is all about how productive are my producers. Now, you can't just look at a gross, you have to look at a net. Because when a plant does photosynthesis, it uses some of the sugars that it made for its own respiration, for its own ATP production. So you have to look at a net. A net is when you take the GPP and you subtract the energy that gets used for their own respiration. So in class, we're going to be doing an experiment. We're going to go out to the pond water. We're going to get some algae. We're going to keep that pond water, and we are going to try and figure out how much photosynthesis does it do over time, and how much respiration does it do over time, and calculate the gross primary productivity of algae out in the pond and the net primary productivity of algae out in the pond. Again, if there's parts of this that you're not sure about, ask me in class. Go back, find these things in your textbook, and do your Cornell notes.